South Carolina State Representative Jerry Govan stepped down earlier this year from the South Carolina House of Representatives after many years of serving the residents of Orangeburg County in Columbia. Now he's a Democratic candidate for State Superintendent of Education. I speak exclusively with Representative Govan for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook.
State Representative Jerry Govan, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Well, thank you, Quintin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry we're not able to do this in person, so I guess we'll have to settle for the Zoom.
Oh, yes, sir. No worries. Yeah, there's no worries. I know, obviously, you are a notable lawmaker. You are the South Carolina State Representative for Orangeburg County and have been for many, many years. But just recently, you decided to step down. And now, obviously, you are a Democratic candidate for South Carolina's State Superintendent of Education. In fact, back in March, ABC Columbia says this: a Midlands lawmaker is doing his hat in the ring to lead South Carolina schools. This afternoon, Orangeburg State Representative Jerry Govan announced he is running for State Superintendent of Education. Govan is a retired educator who has also served in the House for the past 29 years and currently sits on the Education and Public Works Committee. Tell me, why State Representative Govan? Why State Superintendent of Education? Why now?
Well, I think the better question is why not? And if not individuals like myself, then who? We're in a crisis point when it comes to public education in the state. Our state is ranked 43rd in the country. We're spending billions of dollars in terms of investing in the system and roughly nearly a third of the state's budget. Yet still, we find many of our students, I think the last data coming out of the Education Oversight Committee suggests that only 6 of 10 students are not meeting requirements in English and language arts. And further, we have, when it comes to minority students, only 2 out of 10 meet standards when it comes to reading, language arts, and math. So we have a crisis. In addition to that, the public is losing confidence in public education. And so when you couple all that together, the question is why? And the fact that we have so much invested in this that we need to do something. And I feel like the time is right, and I'm the guy for the job, the candidate for the job.
Now, you talk about those, 62% of the kids who are not really meeting the requirements for English, math, and obviously reading and, the other requirements. Where exactly is that in the state?
Well, it's across the board, and particularly in terms of if you look deep down into the data, I think that you'll find that it's not permeated just something on zip code. I think in rural and poor minority areas, I think you have unique challenges. When you look at the data as relates to minority students, with only 2 out of 10 meeting standards. Of course, you want to look at areas like along the I-95 corridor versus the 885 corridor. You want to look at inner city districts and whatnot. But I would venture to say it's bigger than, it's not just a black-white problem, it's a student problem. I mean, what people fail to realize is that a rising tide lifts all boats. So if part of the body aches, then the whole body aches, because it affects our state, affects our economy, and affects us as citizens and taxpayers. So it's something that we should all be concerned about, regardless of the demographics.
Now, what exactly are those minority student challenges right now in the state of South Carolina?
Well, I think that where our students are struggling at is in the basics in terms of, like I said, reading and math and language arts.
Oh, yeah.
We put so much emphasis, and I think part of that reason, by the way, I think we put so much emphasis on high stakes testing in terms of teaching the test that our students, our children are falling behind in basic things that they need to know. Math, English, how to do arithmetic, and how to write. But I think that we can't just sit and suggest that. I'm not suggesting that that they should only have those skills because we have to prepare this generation of students for the next generation of jobs and career fields. And of course, a lot of the things that we're preparing them for today, those jobs, particularly for those at the kindergarten and the first through third grade level, those jobs haven't been even created yet. So I think we have to be flexible. We have to be able to adapt. And I think we have to ensure that we have a curriculum and instruction that basically meets the challenges of the future.
And what are those future skills that the kids actually will need right now?
Well, again, like I said, I think, you need the basic skills in terms of English, math, science. You can talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, English, and also in terms of the arts. I think those things have to be addressed. But like I said, with the advent of what you call artificial intelligence,
Right.
and with the new technology, which is evolving every day, then I think we have to be prepared to meet the challenges posed by those things. Quintin, the fact of the matter is, you have the next generation of young people. They're going to be going to Mars, or we're going to actually put. They're talking about now in terms of establishing colonies on the moon. And I'm not saying that we need to be that we should be so far fetched that we look beyond our needs here. But the point I'm trying to make is that education is an ever evolving type issue. And in order for us to be able, our population of students and young people to be able to compete with the challenges and compete with the rest of the world, we have to have a first class, first rate educational system that moves them in that direction. And in my humble opinion, I think that we're behind that level in South Carolina, and we need to do better.
Now, Representative, let me ask you this. What are those other evolving issues when it comes to public education here in South Carolina?
Well, I think some of the major issues that we have in terms of why we're not where we need to be at is that, first of all, again, we have the issue in terms of public confidence in education. I think that's the top priority that the next state superintendent will have to address, restore confidence in public education in the state. We see a prolific number of people beginning to move their kids and look at alternatives such as school choice in terms of private schools. They're looking at homeschooling, etc., because they feel like they're not getting what they need out of the current system. I think we have to address that. The other thing I think we need to address is the fact that, we have wholesale flight of teachers. We're going to have a major teacher shortage in this state coming up next year. As a matter of fact, they're projecting that there's going to be anywhere from 1,100 to 1,500 teachers short in the classroom. So the challenge there is, how do we not only retain good teachers, but recruit and get others to come into the profession? And so when you look at that particular issue, you have to definitely address the issue of teacher pay, which South Carolina has one of the lowest pay systems for teachers in the country, and that's based on a recent survey by the National Education Association. So we're not paying our teachers enough, but I think it's bigger than teacher pay. I think you also have to look at making people feel valued. I have a background also in personnel and human resources. And I think what you have to do is you have to make people feel like they are valued and that what they are doing is meaningful to the process. And so I think we have a full-scale job that we need to do in terms of ensuring not only that our students do well academically, but being sure that they have the brightest and best when it comes to instruction in terms of teachers and professionals who are receiving what they need to provide those services to our students.
And I want to talk about teachers' pay in just a second, but let me go back to obviously teacher shortage. What is that retention rate in Orangeburg County right now?
Well, yeah, I can't speak to the exact percentage, exact percentages in terms of Orangeburg, but like I said, overall, because sitting on the education committee, I don't look specifically at Orangeburg. I look at the total statewide picture. And right now, we're looking at about roughly, like I said, we're going to be short 1,100 to 1,500 teachers. That's what they're projecting.
Statewide.
right, statewide. And so that affects counties like Orangeburg, and I'll tell you how. Because what ends up happening is you end up in a competition for talent. And so based on the economic well-being of a school district, if an adjoining school district has a stronger tax base and can provide incentives and bonuses, they, in a lot of instances, are able to lure teachers away from one district to another.
Right.
And so you have a lot of movement there. And that causes, particularly when you're trying to, as a superintendent, trying to set the schedule for the upcoming school year, when you have a lot of movement there and instability there, that can cause problems when it comes to planning and putting your program in place for the upcoming school year. So it has a ripple effect. And that's why I think it's important that we have to address it on the state level in terms of leveling the playing field and ensure that these poor, smaller rural school districts are able to attract high quality instruction like the larger school districts, which generally have a stronger tax base and also have more money.
Now, okay, well, what is the current tax base right now in Orangeburg County?
In Orangeburg County, right now, and again, I don't deal with the specific school district here as far as their tax base, but I would estimate, just based on the last time I worked with the school district, which has been about 2 years ago, that our tax base, the average income here was about between 35 to 80,000.
Okay, let me go back to those rural areas and those rural schools. How many high quality teachers are actually being recruited to those rural schools in South Carolina right now?
Well, I would hope that all of them are trying to recruit high quality teachers and whatnot. But if you're asking me for a specific number, the only you would have to ask the individual school districts for those totals, because then it would be based on a summation of each respective school district. And if you were asking, have I talked to every individual? There are 80 plus school districts, 80 plus school districts around the state right now. So, I don't have the specific numbers for each school district in total to say how many, who they're trying to recruit. But I can give you a general idea in terms of that process and what's going on.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, State Representative Dan. Okay, when it comes to recruiting these particular teachers in these areas, all the school districts really, what ideal incentives would be great for these teachers to come here to South Carolina?
Okay, so when it comes to recruitment and retention of teachers, there are a number of things that we've done on a statewide perspective in terms of trying to help that situation. And again, and let me just, because some of these questions I think are more adeptly handled at the district level, because in terms of from a policy standpoint, the school board and the superintendent of that local school district actually dictate some of the questions that you've asked, and you have to know the specifics in terms of that, and not the State Department of Education. The State Department of Education is more or less a central point in which a lot of this is gathered. But we've got to remember that public policy, when it comes to education in the state, is dictated at the LEA level or local education authority level. And that's real important to know. But in terms of incentives and whatnot, and what has been brought to us,
yes,
and I think this is where my strengths come in as a member of the General Assembly and the Education Committee. I can tell you that because of the loss of the number of teachers over the years back and forth, we've tried to remedy that through a number of ways. One, we came up with a plan to basically decrease the number of years teachers would have to work in the system, similar to what law enforcement does. For example, a law enforcement officer can retire after 20 years. Well, the reason for that is because of the burnout and the turnover in terms of the field. So starting in the 90s, and actually, I actually sponsored bills trying to reduce educator retirement down to 25 years. We actually ended up with 28-year retirement in the state of South Carolina for a number of years until recent, when we, because of budgetary hard times and the drain on the retirement system, we had to go back to a 30-year retirement. Now, part of that had to deal with the fact that because of the tax laws and federal laws and lawsuits, 28-year retirement had to be opened up to all state employees as opposed to just educators. And so we got hit with that. The next thing that ended up happening was, we tried to do a program called Terry. Again, to sweeten the pot, to make it more attractive for teachers or persons to consider going into that field for retention and recruitment purposes. And so Terry ended up again because of the drain in the system and because we had to open it up for everyone. That program was recently canceled out. I think last year before last, was the last year that, of course, that the phase out of that particular program. So what that leaves us with at this point in time is dealing with incentives like student loans. I'm proposing that we look at tax cuts because we moved in that direction as a state in terms of with our military personnel, in terms of providing first responders and military personnel with tax cuts and other incentives as a result of the service that they provide. I think we can do the same thing for teachers. Some school districts are now moving to trying to attract and retain teachers in particularly poor areas that have a hard time because of issues dealing with quality of life issues. Right. Teachers, these young folk want to be around places that they can entertain, eat, dine, and do all those kinds of things, and have those kinds of attractions because they have young families. A lot of them don't want to commute, and they want to work in metropolitan type areas. Well, some of the school districts are putting up housing programs, working with local government to provide incentives in terms of free housing. I've introduced bills dealing with student loans. I think that if we can eliminate student loans or reduce or provide some relief, I think that those are some ideas that worth exploring.
Yes, sir. Sorry about that delay there. And who would actually qualify specifically for this tax cut, Representative?
Well, again, I mean, what I'm proposing or suggest that I think that we can provide the same kind of tax relief that we're providing in terms of some of the other classifications of individuals such as first responders in the military, that we consider doing that for teachers or educators as well as part of an incentive package. So, that's what I would recommend.
Yes, sir. And let me ask you this. There's a couple of questions I have there, but what exactly, what can a teacher actually deduct from their taxes?
What now?
Oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. There's a little bit of construction
Yeah.
back here. But what can a teacher actually deduct from their taxes?
Well, right now there's no program in place, and what I'm suggesting is that that's something we can look at.
Okay.
In terms of providing, some type of incentive through a tax reduction and whatnot. And again, if you understand how public policy works, is that if I'm the next state superintendent of education, then what I will do is I will sit down with the head of Ways and Means and also the leadership in terms of the General Assembly and say, how can we sit down and what kind of incentives can we work out? Off the top of your head, I could pull something out of the air, but that's not how public policy works. And the folk thinks that how it is, that's fantasy land, and that's one of the challenges I think in terms of voters are going to have to make in terms of considering what these candidates are saying running for these offices. you can come up with the best ideas, but there's a process that you have to go through. And I'm not wanting to overpromise or really disillusion people into what can't be. There's a process you have to go through. And I understand that process because I've been doing it for 30 years. And so it's important that we understand that, these are just ideas and proposals, but you got to work it through a process in terms of sitting down with the members of the committee, because nothing dealing with money in the state of South Carolina moves at the state level. Not even ideas that you hear these gubernatorial candidates talking about they're going to do A, B, C, D. None of that's going to occur because no constitutional officer, whether it be the governor, state superintendent of education, secretary of state, any of these offices, none of them, when it comes to the appropriations, the only body that has the authority to appropriate funds in the state of South Carolina is the General Assembly, that is the House and Senate. And that appropriations process begins in the House of Representatives, goes over in the Senate, and the only other options are basically those of us from the constitutional standpoint, cheerleaders. Our job is put the proposals out there, put it out there, finding someone in the General Assembly to buy into it, and then selling that idea, and then following it through in terms of rallying support around it.
And how much with this proposed tax cut, state representative, how much would the actual South Carolina teacher save?
Well, again, until you actually go through the process and start crunching the numbers, then you wouldn't know that. A lot of it's going to deal with, and again, trying to explain the appropriations process in a short span of time. And let me just give you an example. Let's say that we wanted to, when we decided, for example, to come up with the reduction of the years an individual would have to work before retirement. And so when we came up with the 20-year retirement plan, staff, and you had to have budgetary experts in terms of the state government, had to sit down and crunch the numbers to see, first of all, based on the number of state employees, how many people would be involved in that process, how much of an impact it would have on the overall revenue of the state, and basically how you would replace that money in the system, because of course that with the approach, when you have reduction in terms of the number of years an individual has to work to retire, you also have a reduction in terms of the amount of proceeds when you have contributing members into the system, amount of money that individuals contribute in the system. Then on top of that, staff had to come in and factor how many, or what was the projected number of new employees coming in the system, because of course, they're the ones that really provide the basis in terms of funding to fund the retirement system, because you have some going out and they're taking money out of the system while you have others coming in that basically support that system. So it's, I understand the extent of your questions you want to drill down, but again, this is why it takes time for these programs and initiatives to be developed and executed, because it's not a simple ABC type process. It's very complicated, and that's why I think it's important to have someone who understands that process and understands the system in terms of the leadership, because they know to the extent of what's to be done and how to go about getting it.
Now, let me ask you this. How would you raise the per pupil funding for all public schools to at least the national average?
Well, I think it's important to get there. The bottom line is, in terms of, when we come up with an alternative way of funding public education in the state of South Carolina. The state of South Carolina's per pupil expenditure really took a hit back during the recession back in 2005. We've never really gotten back to where we need to be. We managed to bring it up each year. And the fact of the matter is, South Carolina has a very antiquated funding formula. We've gone this year, this past year, in this budget, and changed that funding formula, in which the state's ratio now is going to be up to, I think, 75% in terms of what the state will contribute, as opposed to 70% where it is now. And you have to also understand that when you look at funding per pupil expenditure and funding for education in the state, you're not just looking at state sources. You're also looking at money coming from the local effort, which is based on the local tax base, which we alluded to earlier. But you also get money from the federal government as well. So you have three general sources in which, when it comes to public funding for education. So in terms of overall, we're putting money back, but we passed Act 388, which I'm only one of 16 legislators that voted against, which used property taxes as a way of funding public education in the state. It was the biggest mistake the state of South Carolina could have made. And so now what we're doing is it's almost like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And a lot of what we're able to do in terms of additional new funding for public education is directly tied to how well the state economy is doing at the time. And so when you have events like the pandemic that come up, if we don't take prudent steps, and I think the General Assembly did make some prudent steps to ensure that we wouldn't be hurt as badly by it as some other states that have really saw their economies devastated as a result of the pandemic. South Carolina fared pretty well, and we're on the road to recovery in terms of being able to have a pretty robust budget. I think this year is about $14 billion.
Right.
We're pretty much where we normally are, and so it's a question in terms of how you divide up that money and where it's spent.
And how have you all divided that money up so far?
Well, so far out of that budget, matter of fact, we have about a $38.2 billion budget for the state of South Carolina. A lot of those funds some of that money is non-reoccurring. Somewhere about $5 billion is non-reoccurring. We have federal funds of about $12 billion coming in, and overall with the growth in terms of general funds, we're looking at roughly about $10 billion from taxes and things that we collect. So what the state is contributing roughly is about $15 billion, and the rest of it's coming from other sources and from the feds.
Right.
And just to note, when you look at it from an educational standpoint, roughly a third of that budget is going to go to public education. $12 billion when you combine all funding out of that $38 billion.
And with the budget expenditures, state representative, how was that affected by COVID?
Well, in South Carolina, I think that we took some very prudent steps in terms of not overspending. In South Carolina, we have to have a balanced budget. So we didn't overextend ourselves. And we took steps to ensure that we didn't exceed the spending based on and tying it to the previous year. And so when we got the extra money from the federal government in terms of COVID relief funds, combined with our state's economy, which actually did not do bad at all, because we did not totally shut down the state as a result of COVID, then the revenues continued coming in, and so we ended up being in pretty decent shape. And so that's why we were able to have a $15 billion. Normally, it runs about 12, 13. So
right.
Actually, we have a little bit of extra money, and that's what I call the non-recurring money, because that's not something that normally comes in. And so what we'll do is we'll count it as non-recurring because it doesn't occur over and over again. And so we won't actually overspend in the next year's budget when we look at 22, 23.
And when you look at that budget, what else do you see being overspent?
Well, we're not overspending. What I said was we're not overspending our budget. We have a balance. South Carolina is one of the few states that actually, when we adjourn at the end of the year, at the end of our legislative year, we have to have a balanced budget. And so on July 1,
Right.
when the new fiscal year starts,
Right.
everything will tally up, and we'll have a balanced budget. And that's one of the great things about the state of South Carolina. So therefore, we don't end up starting the year in the hole. What we do is we basically have been very prudent with the taxpayer dollars in the state.
Now, speaking of federal funds, State Representative, how much ESSA funds have actually gone to each district in the state of South Carolina?
Well, I don't have the data in front of me to tell you what each district, again, I probably would need to do Einstein to tell you for every specific district, in terms of how much ESSA funds, because, we have 85 districts.
Right.
So to give you a breakdown of that, but I can provide that information to you if you like.
Oh, that's fine.
But off the top of my head, no.
Oh, no worries, no worries. And going back to obviously public education, what was the percentage of suspensions and expulsions by race and ethnicity in 2020?
Well, matter of fact, I might have that. One second, I might just have it.
Okay.
Right. I actually asked the State Department of Education what's going on their website, and one of the things that kind of disturbed me, because they are supposed to keep a warehouse, they're supposed to warehouse that information.
Okay.
Or as maybe I thought I had it in this. Excuse me, just a minute. I thought I might have had that, but I don't. But I will tell you this.
Yes, sir.
One of the concerns that I had when I asked for that information from the State Department was what I saw on their website. And this is based on, I used to work as the county attendance supervisor in Orangeburg. I retired to do that, and I did dropout prevention. So those kinds of statistics and whatnot, normally I would just be able to roll off the top of my head for my particular county, and we would compare that and see how we were doing with the rest of the state. Yes, but for some reason, when I went to the website, the data that they had there was going back to 2015, 2016, and then it cut off. And that kind of bothered me because I don't know whether they would stop maintaining or keeping it, or what the deal is with that. And so that's on my checkoff list. My checkoff list to deal with if I'm the state superintendent of education.
And I hope to get you back on, but Zoom is only giving me 20 seconds to close this out. But State Representative Jerry Govan, it was so great talking to you. Thank you for your time on Quintin's Close-Ups.
All right, you're more than welcome. And I look forward to maybe coming back on as state superintendent. And if you'll give me some of those specific questions in advance, I'll be able to give you some very specific answers.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.